Welcome back. All right. So, news of the day video for all you fine people on the internet for your Wednesday, the 29th of March. We're almost to April. I almost said May, which is right after April, but we got to get through April first. So, the NHL and their schedule and all that, and of course, I'm always clad in NHL gear. They hate me as being proven by what they're considering for next season. The first thing they're considering is a early 16 game night. So one thing that's been talked about a lot, I've seen a lot of rinkside reporters and just bloggers, people who talk about the NHL regularly saying, okay, having all these games start at the same time doesn't work because we can't follow what's going on. So the NHL's gone, we can make that worse. So they're considering a 16 game night during the week. So not even on a weekend, during the week. There is a 16 game night on the second Saturday of April, but the Friday there's no hockey that day, so it'll be fine. Friday I'm intending to honestly kind of take a day off. I'm thinking about just pre-recording a bunch of videos and go out and enjoy myself and get a bit of a break. But during the week, I'm not sure I understand because with 16 games, you're not going to be able to follow everything. And it's at the start of the season, so there's a limited amount of information we're going to get out of a 16 game night, other than the NHL saying, hey, look, we did 16 games the same night. So the imbalanced schedule, it looks like, continues. And not only that, they are considering trying to set a world record for consecutive minutes of a sport being played in the league with games in the Global Series. So the European games, they'd go on early and run until late at night. Just saying right now that if they do that, and if it's going from, say, 6 a.m. my time until 10:30, maybe 11 o'clock my time, however they decide to do this, I'll probably tap out. I'll probably say, okay, I need to get my sleep, so I guess I'm going to miss a couple of games. And again, who's going to watch all of it? It just, setting a world record for the sake of setting the world record just seems odd. So if they do this with their scheduling, especially if they did both, I'll be interested to see what it, again, the NHL should be trying to expand its footprint, making it easier for people to see the product, and I don't know that either of these things do that for them. So we'll see what their decision. I only assume it's because they hate myself and people who talk about the schedule and say it's hard to follow all of this. All right, fine, we'll just make it harder. Okay, you guys don't seem to understand the whole marketing thing and growing the sport. At any rate, we'll see when the schedule comes out what the plan is and where I tap out. All right, Jonathan Toews may play before the end of the season, so he's still not feeling 100%, but he is aware that his time with Chicago is winding down. He's also said that it's weird to see Patrick Kane wearing a Rangers jersey, but it's nice to see him wearing it and see him out there playing for the Rangers. And there are rumors that Toews could be retiring at the end of the season. So it'll be a very quiet end to his career if this is it. But he may come back and play 2-3 games towards the end of the season. So that's the plan at this point. He may only play 1 or 2, but he does want to come back and play and try to play. I don't know what kind of shifts he's going to get. If he'd play 7 minutes, if he'd play 15. But he wants to go out with some kind of a ceremony and the ability to say goodbye to the fans properly. Because this, at the very least, will likely wind up his time as a Chicago Blackhawk. So we'll see what goes on there. There's an interesting situation going on with Boston. And this is one we could have seen coming, and we did see coming. So Taylor Hall apparently might be ready to go. Now, Boston has no cap space to take him off of the IR. So if they take him off of LTIR, they're going to have to play with less than a full complement of players. That has happened to teams this year. You're over the cap by $7 million. Well, you got to set $7 million out, right? So we'll see what the plan is there in Boston. The good news is Boston's almost wrapped up the President's Trophy. So if they lose some games because they can't ice a full roster, it's okay. I would rather see Taylor Hall playing in game situations going to the playoffs and see them playing shorthanded by it's two players, just to make sure he's in game shape for the playoffs. But Boston's finding themselves in a situation we kind of knew they'd end up being in. And the other option is to just hold Hall out until the playoffs start, and then everybody will be completely understanding and accepting of the situation, right? Because it's Boston. Everybody seems to genuinely respect Boston. I'm sorry, I had that chart upside down. At any rate, he may be good to go, and we'll see. Does Boston keep him on the IR? What do they do with him? So Shabbat's out for 2 weeks with a lower body injury for Ottawa. It may very well end his season. We are only 2.5 weeks from the end of the season anyways. So in Ottawa's case, that's going to make it tough. Now, Clevin is going to make his debut in their next game against Philly. Shabbat will not be available. Talbot will. Talbot will be available to play. Odds are he'll be the backup. They've had to go through goalies like Ferguson, Sogard, Mandalese. So they've definitely run the gamut when it comes to their goaltenders. One thing with Ottawa is whether they do or don't end up making it, if they make a miracle run or not, they have a good idea of what they've got in their system going through this summer. And I think that they've got, at least with Sogard, he deserves a chance to be one of the 2 goalies next season. So, yeah, with Shabbat out, it's going to be tough to replace those minutes. Sanderson's had a very good rookie season, I agree. But it is difficult to replace what Shabbat brings to this lineup, and I don't think that anybody necessarily can. Detroit news, Robbie Fabry, lower body injury, he's done for the season. He hasn't played since, I think it's the first week of March. He's been out for that long. Fabry, of course, has a long history of injury, and it's a shame because he seems like a really good guy. And when he's on and he's playing well, he's a decent top 6 option. Not really first liner, but he can be a second liner, and if you have the depth, he can be a third liner as well. I do like Fabry. I hope that he recovers and he's able to play a full season soon. I've said that with him before. Fingers crossed that it happens this time. So with all of the discussion about the Coyotes, and anytime any kind of discussion comes up about, well, they should move Quebec City, there's one thing that I don't think fans focus on enough, and that is the Canadian dollar in comparison with the American dollar. And this makes things more difficult for Canadian owners. And for us as Canadian consumers, it means we're going to be spending more than American consumers when it comes to just about everything National Hockey League related. So currently, the Canadian to US dollar ratio at 74 cents US right now, the Canadian dollar. It's dropped as low as 72. Right now, last I checked, it's at 74. And then when we look at it historically, back in the 90s, when Winnipeg left and Quebec left, it was a big part of the reason why those teams were gone. One of the reasons the team went back to Winnipeg, the Canadian dollar was nowhere near as low as it had been. And the lowest it got in 98, I found that it was down to 64 cents. And I spent the last half hour looking. I know there's an article in a magazine I have somewhere, or an annual I have somewhere, that goes into, and it was at that time, about how there was financial issues related to the Canadian dollar around every Canadian team that wasn't Toronto and Montreal. And the thought process was Vancouver could probably survive as well, but Ottawa, Calgary, and Edmonton were seen as being under threat because they're smaller markets and the Canadian dollar just being so low. And eventually what happened was that the equalization payments were brought in by Gary Bettman in part to save those Canadian franchises. Without those equalization payments, there's a very real chance that we would have a lot fewer Canadian franchises than we have currently, and we might be looking at the Houston Oilers. We might see the Atlanta Flames. This whole idea of more teams going to the States because there just was way too much money being lost on the Canadian team. So equalization payments helped. We still hear about equalization payments, but generally it's usually Canadian teams paying into it. But not that. I found an article from a couple years ago on Calgary getting money from the equalization payments, that Saddle Dome wasn't generating the kind of revenue that other teams were getting, and so Calgary was actually getting money back when they were usually a team paying into it. So, because the top 10 pay for the bottom 10, basically. So if you are cheering for a team that's one of the bigger revenue generators, they will be paying money into that program, and then that money goes to support the teams that are at the bottom. And it does change. It does change which teams are at the bottom, which teams are at the top. And so, although usually the teams at the top, you're looking at your Rangers, Bruins, Chicago, Toronto, Montreal right now, right? So it is something to consider when we talk about, move this team to Quebec City. Why don't they have a team in Hamilton? A lot of it, I think the Canadian dollar still has an impact. And there's always the possibility the Canadian dollar can drop. The Canadian dollar can go up too, but you have to be careful because I remember I was working in retail when the Canadian dollar was actually higher than the American dollar. And if an American was told that their money was actually worth less than Canadian money, they didn't like that as a tourist. They just did not like it. So there is a balance. And of course, in Canada, a lot of it is that there's a lot of jobs where there's exports. And as long as the Canadian dollar is sufficiently lower, you're looking at being able to export goods, and you're being able to manufacture them for cheaper. However, if you're paying in American dollars and you're in a situation where you're running a sports franchise, you don't get any of those benefits. So it is something to consider. It's a little more complicated than just move the team to X location. Also, I want to say that with NCAA signings, there's a lot of them right now. A ton. I could fill the board with NCAA signings. A lot of the NCAA signings that we see, they will get games from now until the end of the season, and we may not see them again. This happens a lot this time of year. Guys get signed, they come in, they play a handful of games, usually for a team that's out of the playoff race, and then the following season they may end up in the AHL. NCAA players, you're signing guys who are 22, 23 years of age, so they're more NHL ready. They're men. You're not getting 17, 18-year-olds that may not be physically mature enough for the NHL. And usually what you see is what you get. So if they're borderline NHLers right now, it's not usually a situation where, well, if we give them a year or two in the AHL, they'll improve and then we'll bring them up. At that point, they'd be 25, which is where things are different with the kids that come in and they're not that great in training camp. You can send them back to junior and they'll probably develop and maybe add a few pounds. NCAA players, you're getting what you're getting. And so some of them are going to be decent NHLers. But one thing it does for the team is it means that that's a contract that they get with a player they didn't have to draft, they didn't have to trade for. It's a free prospect. So worst case scenario, you don't end up renewing his contract when it's done. And, it takes up one of your 50 contracts that you're allotted. But it's not usually a big deal. So there are some NCAA signings that may very well end up being decent NHLers, but the odds of them being like game changers or this being a big deal is one thing. I will say too, though, for the guys who have a choice of going wherever they want, if they're picking certain organizations, it can bode well that franchise is able to negotiate quite well and sell guys on the experience. But then you also would have the counterpoint of, maybe they sign in that location because they feel like it's their best chance to reach the NHL, meaning it may be seen as an easier roster to crack than one of the other ones that was offering them a job. So at any rate, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.